Can you put the slides on, John, please? I thought we'd hear about the faith of a sister in Christ this morning. And the sister in Christ is the Queen. Just wondered if you'd ever thought of the Queen as your sister in Christ. And if that's got any impact on you. I'm always reminded that when we get to heaven, my view of heaven is there'll be a big cross and it's level ground. That everybody who was high status, low status in the world's eyes, it's all completely irrelevant in heaven. And that goes for the Queen and it goes for each one of us. Start with a verse. I should say, I got these quotes from what the Queen has said over many years in a publication which is also on the internet by a guy called Mark Green, heads up the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity. He used to be an advertising person in London and New York many years ago. Rachel and I heard him at Spring Harvest a few years ago. Matthew 20:28. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Next slide. It's a photo of a bus, and at the front of the bus on the destination it says "not in service." And I was really struck by that in terms of when am I not in service? And I was challenged because that's actually more frequently than perhaps it ought to be. Aren't we in service all the time unless we're resting, recovering, whatever that is? You hopeful, John? I'll carry on reading. If you want to find this on the internet, it's called The Queen's Way, an LICC, a celebration of biblical discipleship in public life. First quote from her Christmas address in 2014. Yeah, so there's the bus. How frustrating is it? I'm sure that many of us haven't been on a bus anytime recently, but some of us use buses all the time. But how frustrating is it when you want a bus and one of those goes past? Not helpful. And again, I'm challenged for myself, as you may be challenged, with when have I got that sign over my head? Next slide, sorry, John. It was a Christmas address in the 2014. The words of the Queen. For me, the life of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, whose birth we celebrate today, is an inspiration and an anchor in my life, a role model of reconciliation and forgiveness. He stretched out his hands in love, acceptance, and healing. Next slide. And again. Oh, that's it. For me, the teachings of... So this is the Christmas address in... I can hardly read this. 2000, thank you. Might be easier to read it off there, might it? For me, the teachings of Christ and my own personal accountability before God provide a framework in which I try to lead my life. I, like so many of you, have drawn great comfort in difficult times from Christ's word and example. Next slide. 1980. In difficult times, we may be tempted to find excuses for self-indulgence and to wash our hands of responsibility. Christmas stands for the opposite. We need to go out and look for opportunities to help those less fortunate than ourselves, even if that service demands sacrifice. Next slide. I found this a staggering slide. So the author has obviously been through every single one of the Queen's Christmas speeches and analysed it. And each dot is each year that she's been on the throne giving a Christmas address. The coloured dots are the talks in which year where she's mentioned looking out for neighbours or disadvantaged people. So early on it was patchy, but if you see at the bottom, she's referred to that every year consistently for a number of years. Next slide. Christmas Address 1976. Remember that good spreads outwards and every little does help. Mighty things from small beginnings grow, as indeed they grew from the small child of Bethlehem. Next slide. 1974. It's time to recognise that in the end, we all depend upon each other and that we are therefore responsible for each other. 1983. 1981. Christ not only revealed to us the truth in his teachings, he lived by what he believed and gave us the strength to try to do the same. And finally, on the cross, he showed the supreme example of physical and moral courage. Next slide. Another interesting one. So the guys looked at every single one of the Queen's Christmas speeches and marked which ones has she spoken about peace in. And you can see that's the overwhelming majority. Next slide. 1976. The gift I would most value next year is that reconciliation should be found wherever it is needed. A reconciliation which would bring peace and security to families and neighbours at present suffering and torn apart. And the last slide. 2015. He knew rejection, hardship and persecution, and yet it is Jesus Christ's generous love and example which has inspired me through good times and bad. I just find those quotes amazing. Wonder how you would describe your faith and what it means to you in your daily life as she's expressed that. I was reminded of a Desert Island Discs episode with a guy called David Knott. I think it's David Knott. He works in 3 London hospitals, but when there's a war on, he goes to the war zone and he performs surgery in the heat of battle. And we may be more familiar with that now because of all that we've seen in the Ukraine. There's a clip here where he talks about his experience and he mentions an encounter he had with the